Hi, everyone. This is the recording for the Heart Lake First Nation Solid Waste Management Feasibility Study presentation. We held this presentation on September 24th and figured we would do a recording of the presentation in case you were unable to make it and you were curious about what we were chatting about. My name is Janessa. I'm an engineer in training at WSP. I work under the municipal team, and under the municipal team, we work with projects involving solid waste management, as well as water, wastewater, and stormwater projects. So WSP has been working very closely with Heart Lake First Nation over the past several months on the solid waste management feasibility study, which is going to be the focus of the presentation today. This is the presentation overview. So what you see on the right-hand side are the topics that we are going to go over during the presentation today. First is the project overview, where we're going to provide some background on the feasibility study. Then we'll get into why solid waste management is important, as well as the solid waste management facilities. So the types of facilities, what can be disposed of at each facility, and examples of each type of facility. We'll also chat about solid waste management hauling, so the type of hauling that you might see on the nation. And we'll get into the options that we are proposing as part of the feasibility study and how the outcome of the feasibility study will affect you as a community member. So project overview, as I mentioned, we're going to provide some background on the feasibility study. We're going to chat about the feasibility study, the intent of the feasibility study, and the progress we've made so far. Project background and context. So WSP is developing a solid waste management feasibility study for Heart Lake First Nation. Now you might be wondering what a feasibility study is, and a feasibility study, if I were to define it, I would say that it is a high-level assessment of whether a project is suitable or beneficial for a community. A feasibility study is part of the planning phase, so it's very high level. If the study shows that a project is beneficial and suitable for a community, and if the community decides to move forward with that project, then we move into design and construction of that project. So the point of this solid waste management feasibility study is to determine if a new solid waste management facility would be suitable and beneficial for Heart Lake First Nation and its members. So the reason as to why we are developing this feasibility study is because we are looking to improve the waste management infrastructure and the recycling and waste sorting services to better support Heart Lake First Nation. As part of this study, we are taking a look at the existing waste management practices, and also part of that, we're taking a look at other factors such as environment and land use impact. We're taking a look at costs as well as future population. And we are combining all of that to develop sustainable waste management options for the community for the next 30 years. So I'll now draw your attention to the image on the right-hand side of the screen. This is an image of Heart Lake First Nation, and we've also pointed out the existing Heart Lake First Nation landfill. So the community members might know this landfill as the area where you can bring waste to this landfill site. There's 4 bins on the landfill site for you to dispose of your waste, but there's also a bunch of piles throughout the site for you to dispose of other goods. So as part of this feasibility study, we are looking into the construction of a diversion station on the existing Heart Lake First Nation landfill. And we will further explain what a diversion station is as we get into the presentation. So why is solid waste management important? We're going to go through another reasons as to why solid waste management is important, which is also why we are developing the feasibility study. So solid waste management is important because, of course, we want to protect the health of the environment and humans. So many of the substances accepted and handled by solid waste management facilities, such as used oils or paints, batteries, chemicals, that can contaminate the soil, the water, and the air. And that can have a negative impact on the environment and human health if not disposed of properly. Other substances that are accepted by solid waste management facilities are also fridges and freezers, which have freon gas. And if humans are exposed to freon gas, it is life-threatening. So that can have a negative impact on the human health if not disposed of properly as well. And oftentimes, rural communities don't have the solid waste management facilities engineered and designed to process and dispose of these substances. So, moving into solid waste management facilities, there are two types of facilities we're going to chat about. One type of facility is already part of Heart Lake's current solid waste management system, and the other type of facility is one that we are proposing as part of the feasibility study. So the first one is a landfill. This is part of Heart Lake's current solid waste management system. A landfill is a final destination for waste that cannot be recycled or recovered. So what happens is that waste is picked up from your home and your businesses and it's taken to the landfill where it is buried between layers of dirt to prevent environmental contamination. So at the landfill, sections of the landfill are filled at a time with waste, and once one section is filled up, it's covered with soil and vegetation. And we don't want at the landfill, they don't want the waste to be exposed overnight. That's why it's covered with soil and vegetation. You'll also notice at the landfill, so if you're looking at the image on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a drainage system. And what happens is that this drainage system collects and treats something called leachate, which is essentially liquid waste. Landfills also have plastic liners and clay barriers to prevent soil and water contamination, which you will see on the right-hand side of the screen as well on that image. Typical uses of a landfill. So a landfill provides a designated space for non-recyclable waste. So this is important. Landfills don't accept recyclable waste. If you have recyclables, it needs to be taken to other types of facilities, one of which we will get into in a few slides here. And landfills also reduce the risk of improper disposal and environmental contamination, which we chatted about a bit earlier. Examples of materials that may be accepted at the landfill include non-recyclable household metals such as aluminum foil. There's non-recyclable paper and cardboard, so that would include takeout boxes, used tissues, paper towels, and then landfills also accept non-recyclable plastics. So that would be plastic plates, plastic cutlery, chip bags, and candy wrappers. They also accept non-recyclable styrofoam and food waste. So that would be your table scraps, spoiled food, oil and grease, or shells or bones. Landfills also accept glass and ceramics, so food jars, light bulbs, or broken glass. They also accept organics, and that could be wood or cigarette ashes or cat litter. And landfills also accept housekeeping materials, so that could be floor sweepings as well, or used filters. So this is an example of a landfill that is very close to Beaver Lake landfill. It's actually the landfill that is closest to Beaver Lake landfill. That is closest to the Heart Lake First Nation. So this is an example of a landfill that is closest to Heart Lake First Nation, and it is called the Beaver Lake landfill. So the Beaver Lake landfill is owned and operated by Lac La Biche County. It's about 56 kilometers southwest of Heart Lake First Nation, so that's about a 1 hour drive from the nation. And all of the waste that is disposed of on the nation is actually taken to the Beaver Lake landfill. The next type of facility we want to chat about is the diversion station. So this is what we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, where we chatted about what we are proposing to be constructed on the existing Heart Lake First Nation landfill. It's a diversion station. So a diversion station is a facility that receives materials that can be recycled or are hazardous. And this is the key difference between a diversion station and a landfill. A diversion station accepts recyclables and hazardous materials, whereas landfills do not. So if you have recyclables or hazardous materials, it can be taken to a facility such as a diversion station. And the materials that are disposed of, the materials that are disposed of at the diversion station, it needs to be taken to dedicated facilities for processing. So for example, recyclable materials or paints, they each need to be taken to their dedicated facilities for recovery. And household waste would still need to be collected and hauled to the Beaver Lake landfill, even if the community has a diversion station. Typical uses of a diversion station. Diversion stations promote recycling and resource recovery. It reduces reliance on landfills by reducing the amount of waste that ends up in a landfill, and it provides a convenient drop-off location for residents. So if you have an item that is too large to be collected or picked up by the nation on during the weekly pickup, it can be dropped off at something like a diversion station. Examples of materials that may be accepted at the diversion station that include scrap metals, tires, white goods, so that would be electronic goods such as fridges or washing machines. Diversion stations also accept e-waste, which would be electronic devices such as your phone or computer or TV. Station the diversion station also accepts yard waste, so that would be your grass clippings or your leaves during the fall time. They also accept household hazardous waste, which would be your used batteries, chemicals, paints, oils, all the stuff we talked about earlier. Diversion stations also accept recyclable materials and oversized materials such as furniture or mattresses. Solid waste management hauling. So there are two types of hauling we'll chat about. Both of these types of hauling is already part of Heart Lake's current solid waste management system, and it's something that we're going to propose to continue in our feasibility study. So the first type of hauling we'll chat about is direct hauling. And direct hauling is the collection and transportation of waste from a household or business to a landfill using the same vehicle. So the vehicle that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is the vehicle that the nation currently uses to haul waste from your homes to the Beaver Lake landfill. So once this vehicle is full, it goes directly to the landfill and it doesn't stop partway to transfer the waste to another vehicle or to another facility. So the waste is hauled directly from your homes to the landfill, hence the name direct haul. Also part of the direct hauling process is something called a curbside bin. You might be familiar with this bin because all the homes on the nation they all have this bin. This is a curbside bin, which is a tough and durable container placed at the edge of a property for the collection of household waste. So as a community member, you put your waste into these bins and you leave it on the curb every week for pickup by Heart Lake First Nation. The next type of hauling we'll chat about is third-party hauling. And third-party hauling is the collection and transportation of waste from the Heart Lake First Nation landfill to the Beaver Lake landfill by a third party using the same vehicle. So the same type of material that is accepted during direct hauling, so the type of waste that you dispose of in that curbside bin and that is picked up by Heart Lake First Nation every week, the same type of waste can be disposed of and picked up for third party hauling. So you can bring the same type of materials to the Heart Lake First Nation landfill, and then that waste can be picked up by a third party and brought to Beaver Lake landfill. So the nation currently uses Seven Lakes, which is a third party, and it is a nation-owned company to haul waste from the Heart Lake First Nation landfill to the Beaver Lake landfill. Feasibility study options. So we'll get into the options that we're proposing as part of this feasibility study, but first I want to chat through Heart Lake's current solid waste management system so you can compare and contrast between the current solid waste management system and what we are proposing as part of the feasibility study. So Heart Lake's current solid waste management system, I like to think of it as the system having two components. So first is curbside collection by Heart Lake First Nation, and the second is the hauling of waste from the Heart Lake First Nation landfill to the Beaver Lake landfill. So if we're just looking at the first component, there's curbside collection by Heart Lake First Nation. So as a community member, you put waste into those curbside bins and it's picked up by Heart Lake First Nation every week, and the waste is hauled directly to the Beaver Lake landfill. If we're taking a look at the second component, as a community member, you can also bring waste to the Heart Lake First Nation landfill and dispose of it in one of the 4 bins on that landfill. So the bins that are on the landfill, they're called roll-off bins. They're open on all 4 sides, which means you can throw in waste from either direction into the bin. So if you throw in waste into the roll-off bins at Heart Lake First Nation, the third party Seven Lakes will pick up waste from these bins and they will haul it directly to Beaver Lake landfill. So like I mentioned earlier, whether you decide to throw out your waste through curbside collection or whether you decide to bring your waste to the Heart Lake First Nation landfill, it ends up at the same location, which is the Beaver Lake landfill. Now we want to get into the similarities and the differences between the options that we're proposing. We don't want to bombard you with the options just yet. The options that we're proposing as part of the feasibility study, they're very similar, which is why we want to highlight the similarities and the differences to ease you into the options. So what is the same between the proposed options? First of all, there is curbside collection with direct haul to Beaver Lake Landfill by Heart Lake First Nation. So again, you're going to continue putting your waste out into those bins, and it's going to be picked up on a weekly basis by Heart Lake First Nation and brought to Beaver Lake Landfill. That won't change in any of the options that we're proposing. All the options that we're proposing includes the construction of a new diversion station, and the diversion station will be able to accept recyclables and oversized waste. And the diversion station is going to be owned and operated by Heart Lake First Nation. So there are some differences between the options. The differences are the type of vehicle that is going to be used for curbside collection, the type of bins that will be provided at the diversion station, as well as who is hauling the bins from the diversion station to the landfill. So whether that is Heart Lake First Nation or a third-party hauler such as Seven Lakes. So the type of vehicle that's being used for curbside collection and the type of bins that are being provided at the diversion station, that's all dependent on who is hauling the bins from the diversion station to the landfill, and we'll get into that relationship later on in the slides. So these are the options that we are proposing as part of the feasibility study. It's a lot of text, so we'll walk everyone through what each of the options contain and make sure that you can digest the information. So there are three options that we're proposing. Again, I like to think of each option having two components similar to Heart Lake's current solid waste management system. So with all three options, the first component is curbside collection. As I mentioned earlier, curbside collection is not going to change. You're still going to dispose of your waste in those curbside bins, and it's still going to be picked up on a weekly basis. The second component for all of these options is the hauling of waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill. So as a community member, you're still going to bring your waste to the Heart Lake First Nation landfill, except there would be a diversion station constructed on top of it. So you're bringing your waste to the same location, and the waste is still going to be hauled from that Heart Lake First Nation landfill location with a diversion station now, and it's going to be hauled from that location to the Beaver Lake landfill. So the two components are still very similar to Heart Lake's current solid waste management system. So getting into the first option, if we're just looking at curbside collection, that includes the direct hauling of waste with a haul-all truck to the Beaver Lake landfill by Heart Lake First Nation. So curbside collection will be done with a haul-all truck, and a haul-all truck is what the nation is currently using to haul waste from your homes to the Beaver Lake landfill. It's also the vehicle that we showed a bit earlier in the slides. Next component is the hauling of waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill. So that includes the pickup and hauling of roll-off and front-load bins, pickup and hauling of waste in the roll-off and front-load bins from the new diversion station to Beaver Lake landfill by the third-party Seven Lakes. So as a community member, you'll continue bringing your waste to the diversion station, but you can dispose of waste in roll-off or front-load bins. And roll-off bins, as I mentioned earlier, they are open on all sides. You can throw in waste from any direction into the bin versus a front-load bin is only open from the front as the name suggests, so you can only throw in waste from the front of the bin. And the roll-off and the front-load bins would be provided by Seven Lakes. Seven Lakes owns these bins and they can be rented to the nation for the diversion station. So the waste in these bins would be hauled to the Beaver Lake landfill by the third party Seven Lakes. And the diversion station will be able to accept recyclables and oversized waste. Moving on to option 2, curbside collection includes the direct hauling of waste with a mini rear load truck to the Beaver Lake landfill by Heart Lake First Nation. So the mini rear load truck has more capacity in comparison to the haul-all truck, which means that there's going to be less trips between the nation and the Beaver Lake landfill. Moving on to the second component, which is the hauling of waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill. This includes the pickup and hauling of waste in the roll-off bins from the new diversion station to Beaver Lake landfill by Heart Lake First Nation. So Heart Lake First Nation would be hauling the waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill, and they would need to purchase roll-off bins to store at the diversion station so community members can continue throwing waste out and bringing their waste to the diversion station. And the diversion station will be able to handle recyclables and oversized waste. Option 3, curbside collection includes, or curbside collection and direct hauling would be done with the mini rear load truck. Again, it has more capacity than the haul all truck, and the hauling of waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill would be done by the third party Seven Lakes, and Seven Lakes would be able to provide roll off and front load bins to the nation. And similar to the other two options, the diversion station will still be able to accept recyclables and oversized waste. So these are the three options that we are proposing as part of the feasibility study. We also want to chat, we would also like to chat about how we got to these options and the reasoning behind these options. So first is curbside collection. You'll notice that we propose two types of trucks for curbside collection. One is the haul-out truck and one is the mini rear load truck. So what we did is that we took a look at the current population and we applied a reasonable growth rate to get the future population. And we did a similar calculation by getting the current waste generation, applying the growth rate to match with the future population, and then that is how we got the future waste generation in 30 years. So if we're taking a look at the waste that's going to be generated in 30 years, and we take a look at the capacity of the haul-all truck and the mini rear load truck, both of these trucks will be able to handle the waste even 30 years in the future. So the haul-all truck, again, it is what the nation currently uses to haul waste from your homes to the Beaver Lake landfill. Waste is loaded into the truck from the side of the truck versus the mini rear load truck. It has more capacity than the haul-all truck, which means less trips between the nation and the Beaver Lake landfill, and waste is loaded from the back of the truck. We also took a look at bigger trucks, meaning trucks with more capacity. This includes the front end truck as well as the rear load truck. So both of these trucks, while they do have more capacity, they are heavier, which means that they will add stress and deterioration to the gravel roads on the nation. It's a lot harder to maneuver, especially during snowy and rainier conditions, and it costs a lot more operation and maintenance and very specialized training. So for those reasons, we did not go with the heavier trucks. Next is who is hauling the bins and the type of bins. So for the hauling of waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill, it can either be done by the third party Seven Lakes or Heart Lake First Nation. So with the third party Seven Lakes, they're able to provide roll-off bins or front-load bins, or Heart Lake First Nation is able to purchase roll-off bins, and the third-party Seven Lakes is able to provide front-load bins to the nation. Versus if it's just Heart Lake First Nation who is hauling waste from the diversion station to the Beaver Lake landfill, they would need to purchase roll-off bins for the diversion station so that community members can continue bringing waste to that site for disposal. Now you might be wondering why we decided on a diversion station and why not another type of facility such as a landfill. And the reason is because diversion stations accept recyclables and oversized materials while landfills do not. So because diversion stations accept recyclables and oversized landfills, it addresses one of the concerns that we brought up at the beginning of the presentation, and one of the goals of the feasibility study, which is to help improve recycling and waste sorting services on the nation. Another reason as to why we chose a diversion station is because Beaver Lake landfill is already nearby and the nation already has existing relations with the Beaver Lake landfill. So it makes sense to continue bringing the waste to the Beaver Lake landfill, which is nearby, versus building a landfill in the nation, which is redundant. And again, it doesn't address the concerns that we noted at the beginning of the presentation. Now, what does the outcome of the feasibility study mean for you as a community member? Prior to the diversion station opening, the nation is going to hire an operator at the diversion station, which means that there's some employment opportunities with this new station. The nation will also provide public education around how to use the diversion station. So that could look like a pamphlet with a list of materials that will be accepted at the diversion station and where to place these materials into which areas at the diversion station. The nation will also establish partnerships with recyclers and waste transfer companies. So with recyclers, the recyclers will pick up the recycled waste from the diversion station and bring it to the proper facilities for processing. And with the waste transfer companies, they'll pick up the hazardous waste and bring it to the correct facilities for processing. The nation will also engage with the Heart Lake First Nation community buildings and facilities to manage waste collection and transfer to the diversion station. After the diversion station is open, the community members will be expected to sort recyclables and other accepted materials at home before bringing all of that to the diversion station to place in designated containers, areas, or piles. And like I mentioned earlier, the curbside collection of household waste will continue even with the diversion station on the nation. We also want to emphasize that it's going to be a team effort between the nation, the operators, and the community members for the diversion station to operate properly. Everyone will need to follow the guidelines and the directions at the diversion station so it operates as designed and so that we can help protect the health of the community, the land, and the environment. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself, Janessa Chin, at the email and the phone number here, or you can reach out to Jesse from Heart Lake through the email or the phone number here. Thank you for joining this presentation, and we hope you enjoyed.